Hello all, I'm Dr. Avni Ratan. I'm your faculty at Conceptual Psychology. I welcome you all today to a quick revision of social psychology for IHBAS M.Phil entrance examination. I have attempted to include all the important topics which are repeatedly asked from the previous year questions. Those who are lagging behind in their preparation can join these lectures for free, and those who are starting their preparation for M.Phil next year can download the Conceptual Psych app. You could follow the instructions and log into the Conceptual Psychology domain. You will find in-depth lectures and question banks on all the subjects which are relevant for your preparation. So let's delve in for today's lecture on social psychology. Now, starting with what is social psychology? So, as you know that social psychology, it is a scientific study of how people think about, how they influence, and how they relate to one another. So, unlike sociology, which looks at large groups and societies, social psychology focuses on individuals in social situations. Alright, so here we are focusing on individuals in social situations. So, unlike where we study personality, which studies differences between individuals, social psychology is more concerned with general patterns of how people behave and interact. So it's about how people behave and interact. For an example, if we want to know why a crowd cheers during a cricket match, a sociologist may study group norms or culture, while a social psychologist would study how each individual feels influenced by others to cheer for the match. Now, the early experiments, when we study the history of social psychology, the first experiment was done in 1898, which was Triplett on cyclists' performance in groups. The first textbook was written around 1908. The field, it grew rapidly after World War II, especially when psychologists tried to understand obedience and prejudice during the Nazi regime. Coming on to what is social in social psychology. So the word social has two meanings over here. One is that we are looking at the social environment, by which we mean groups, organizations, norms, we mean roles, culture, and we also mean the support systems. The second is social behavior, where we are looking at the attitudes, motivations, emotions, activities which show our response to the environment. So social psychology, it studies how the environment influences individual behavior. So here we are looking at how the environment influences individual behavior. Now, how do we make it simpler to understand? We'll understand it through an example that a student may feel motivated to study harder if they are in a group where everyone values education, right? So here, where everyone values education is the social environment. At the same time, their own emotions, like maybe the anxiety that they feel before the exam, that reflects their social behavior. Okay, so that's how the social environment and social behavior can be understood. Now, what is the nature, scope, and the history of social psychology? The scientific nature of social psychology is that social psychology is considered a science. It is a field which follows certain values and methods, and social psychology is scientific because it values accuracy, it values objectivity, it values skepticism and open-mindedness. Now, what is accuracy? Where one collects information as carefully and in an error-free manner as possible. Okay, so here there is collection of information in an error-free manner. So here, running experiments to test whether people really help strangers more when they are in a good mood. This is the example of accuracy, where we are running the experiments to test certain things. Second is objectivity. So, objectivity is avoiding the personal biases. So, not letting a researcher's own beliefs about gender roles affect how they interpret data. So, that is one of the examples of objectivity. Coming to skepticism is where one is not accepting the findings until they are repeatedly tested, right? So, here repeated testing of findings is important. So, just because one study shows social media makes people lonely, scientists or researchers won't accept it unless many studies confirm the same. So, that is skepticism. Now, coming to open-mindedness. So, being ready to change views if new evidence shows something different, right? So, earlier, psychologists believed that memory works like a video recorder. So, later, evidence showed that it is reconstructive, so they changed their view, right? So, here, changing viewpoints if new information challenges the existing one. So, because social psychology uses experiments, it uses observation, and it uses careful analysis, it is a scientific study. So, I hope it's clear till now. What does it do apart from being scientific in nature? Social psychology focuses on individuals, right? So, even though the societies differ, so such as the marriage practices in India would be pretty much different from the US, it is always the individuals who would think, who would feel, and who would act, right? So, people fall in love, people fight, they discriminate, or they help. These are individual actions, even if it is influenced by the culture, right? So let's just say there is a riot. So in a riot, it may look like that the crowd is violent, but actually it is individuals who are choosing to throw the stones, or it is the individual who is choosing to remain peaceful, right? So here, social psychology, it focuses on individuals. So that is the second thing that you need to keep in mind. Okay, so the third thing is that social psychology, it focuses on thoughts and behavior. So it tries to understand the factors which shape our actions, feelings, and our beliefs. Why do you think that people obey authority? Why do some people help strangers while others ignore them? So researchers, they group these influences into major categories like cultural factors, biological influences, personality traits, and even social context. Okay, so you need to keep in mind that social psychology, it focuses on thoughts and behavior as it looks into the factors which shape our actions, feelings, and beliefs. Let us look at the history of social psychology. So, I'll be very, very brief over here, and if you can, please memorize these pointers because these are often asked in exams. So, before the 1900, the first experiment that was done was done by Triplett in 1898, where people perform better when they are competing, right? So here people performed better while they are competing. This experiment was done by Triplett in the year 1898. Okay, now in 1908, the first textbook of social psychology was released. So it was released by McDougall and Ross. Now in the 1930s and in the 1950s, Kurt Lewin, who's the father of modern social psychology. Please keep that in mind. Kurt Lewin, father of modern social psychology. He emphasized that experiments and group dynamics are important, right? So here there was an emphasis on experiments and on group dynamics. Then Leon Festinger, he developed strong research methods and later he proposed the cognitive dissonance theory. So here we would also be keeping in mind regarding Leon Festinger, who developed strong research methods and later proposed the cognitive dissonance theory. Okay, coming to the World War II era. So here the research on obedience, the experiment by Milgram, conformity, which was Ash and Sheriff, and group roles, Zimbardo's present experiment, also came into the picture, right? So here as of now, keep in mind that it was on obedience, then conformity, and group roles. These were also studied by World War II era. Now in the 1960s and in the 1980s, studies on aggression, right? Berkowitz. So here the studies on aggression were also included. Even studies on group decision making. So here studies on group decision making, which was done by Janice, after which we studied about prejudice reduction also. So here prejudice reduction was, it was supported by Alport. and sheriff, and the bystander effect. And here we also look at the bystander effect, which is by Darley and Latin. Imagine, we've been studying about prejudice reduction since the 1960s and 1980s, and till date, it's a work in progress. Now, in late 20th century, there was a rise of cognitive orientation where you would study about persuasion models. And attitude behavior relationship. Then we would also look at the decision making flaws. It was given by Kahneman. And Tversky. The 21st century, it brings in the new directions where you would study about the social neuroscience. You would also see how culture and evolution affect behavior, how it affects the health and happiness. So here, 21st century came with social neurosciences. So I think that's a very easy and a very quick way to learn about the history of social psychology. If I give you an example, the Milgram's obedience experiment, it showed that the ordinary people could give painful shocks to others just because an authority told them to. So this helped explain how Nazi officers justified their atrocities. Then talking about Darley and Latin, they explained why sometimes nobody helps in emergencies, which is the bystander effect. So why everyone thinks that someone else will act, reducing our own responsibility into the situation. I hope it's clear and easy to recall by now. Moving on to the traditional and the theoretical perspectives. The first is the field theory by Kurt Lewin. So, Kurt Lewin, he is often known as the father of modern social psychology. He used Gestalt principles. That means that you see people as wholes, not just parts, to explain the human behavior, right? He gave the famous equation. Here you need to keep this equation in mind because it is also asked frequently in exams, where behavior, which is B, is a function of both the person and the environment. So what does this mean? This means that people's actions depend not only on who they are, but also the situation they are in, right? My action would depend not only on who I am, but it would also depend on the situation that I am in. So here, the key idea is that a person's life space, that means that their total environment, plus the psychological forces at a given time would influence the behavior. It would include the places that we go to, the people whom we interact with, the media that we are consuming, the goals that we have, and it would also, include our imagined thoughts. So normally, calm student may get aggressive during a heated political protest. Why? Because the situation, which is the crowd, the slogans, the excitement, it is combined with the person's beliefs which trigger that behavior. Or a shy person may speak up confidently when giving a class presentation because that environment, which could be their academic setting, their expectation, it pushes them to act differently. So by these two examples, we could understand the field theory given by Kurt Lewin. Moving on to the cognitive dissonance theory given by Lewin Festinger. So we all want our beliefs, attitudes and behaviors to be consistent, right? So when they clash, we feel the mental discomfort. So when the beliefs, attitudes and behaviors are clashing, we would feel a mental discomfort. Now this is known as cognitive dissonance. So to reduce this discomfort, we change our beliefs or behaviors. So for an example, a smoker knows that smoking causes cancer but still smokes. So this creates a dissonance. To reduce that dissonance, they may change their behavior, that is, they may quit smoking. They might change their belief that, okay, this research is exaggerated, or they may start to give justification. My grandfather smoked and lived to 90. So a student who skips studying but believes that education is important may say that one day off won't matter, I'll study extra tomorrow. So that is also an example of cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance, it explains why people sometimes justify unhealthy or irrational choices instead of, changing their behavior. Let's move on to the psychodynamic approaches. So based on Freud and the others such as Jung, Adler, Erikson, psychodynamic approaches, they say that human behavior is influenced by the unconscious drives and the internal conflicts between the personality structures, which is the ego and superego. They also focus on early childhood experiences and unresolved conflicts. For an example, a person who had strict parents might unconsciously rebel against authority in adulthood. Or a student's fear of exams may actually reflect deeper unresolved anxieties from the childhood, right? So even though many psychodynamic ideas are debated today, they still influence how we think about the hidden motivations in our social behavior. The next approach is the sociobiology. So sociobiology, it studies how evolution and genetics influence our social behavior. So how does evolution and genetic would influence the social behavior? That is under social biology. So the idea here is that many behaviors like cooperation, aggression, attraction, they evolved because they increased the survival and the reproduction rates, right? So what were the key behaviors which were studied here? First were the mating systems. So monogamy, one partner. Polygamy, multiple partners, etc. Right? So these were also studied under the mating systems. Then what else was studied was altruism. The second that was studied was altruism. So what is altruism? Where you help others even at a personal cost. And these helping genes, they survive through maybe your relatives or however it is. Then there is dominance, which was also studied. So the animal pecking orders apply to humans too, right? The boss-employee or the leader-follower relationship, that also studies the dominating hierarchies. So for example, smiling is universal. Babies smile everywhere. So this suggests that it has a genetic basis. But how we use smiles in the social settings? It could be a polite smile, it could be a genuine smile that is shaped by our culture, right? Another example could be where a mother is risking her life to save her child, and this can be explained as protecting her genetic investment. So far we have covered the field theory, we have covered cognitive dissonance theory, the psychodynamic approaches, and sociobiology. That wraps up the first unit of social psychology. I wish you happy learning. Thank you.